An essay was recently sent to me, allegedly written by a former teacher at a majority black school venting his frustrations with the black students. He originally posted it in the rants and raves sections of the Mobile, Alabama Craigslist site. It's a long essay that goes in some very wrong directions, and as a teacher who has spent his entire career in a majority black city, teaching at a school with roughly 90% black population, I'm going to take however much time is needed to respond to every word of it in one sitting. I can't promise I'll stay as calm and composed as I intend to. The truth is usually a tough thing to accept, so I understand if this is flagged. It would be a cowardly thing to do, but I understand it. Some people just ignore unpleasant truths. However, if you think ignoring the problem or trying to censor the truth will help our black children improve, you're dreaming. This is important, so I'm happy to repost indefinitely if necessary. I find it interesting that no one has had the intellect to refute anything in the essay. They can only attempt to censor it, as if doing so somehow makes it invalid. Weak minds, weak minds. Until recently, I taught at a predominantly black high school in a southern state. Well, I'm not censoring you. In fact, I'm putting your essay on center stage. I'm also excited to hear all of the plans you have in place for helping our black children improve, since your introduction implies that you write this essay with the interest of their improvement. The mainstream press gives a hint of what conditions are like in black schools, but only a hint. Expressions journalists use like chaotic or poor learning environment or lack of discipline do not capture what really happens. There is nothing like the day-to-day experience of teaching black children, and that is what I will try to convey. Most whites simply do not know what black people are like in large numbers, and the first encounter can be a shock. It's your second paragraph and you're already generalizing behavior of all black people and contrasting it to that of whites. I'd agree that most people outside of schools don't realize what it's like to teach young people in large numbers, especially those who come from poverty. But you've already phrased this as if black people are a different species. You're off to a rocky start. One of the most immediately striking things about my students was they were loud. They had little conception of ordinary decorum. It was not unusual for 5 blacks to be screaming at me at once, instead of calming down and waiting for a lull in the din to make their point, something that occurs to even the dimmest white students. Blacks just tried to yell over each other. It did no good to try to quiet them, and white women were particularly inept at trying. I sat in one woman's class as she begged the children to pipe down. They just yelled louder so their voices would carry over hers. Many of the black students would repeat themselves over and over again, just louder. It was as if they suffered from Tourette's syndrome. They seemed to have no conception of waiting for an appropriate time to say something. They would get ideas in their heads and simply had to shout them out. I might be leading a discussion on government and suddenly be interrupted. "We gotta get more Democrats. Clinton, she good." The student may seem content with that outburst, but 2 minutes later, he would suddenly start yelling again. "Clinton good." Here is where you make several flaws that trend throughout the essay. One is your failure to bother understanding the cultural roots for the behavior of your students. Next is your fallacious juxtaposition of a minority group to the majority group. Thirdly, you demonstrate that you lack the skill set to teach children from this environment, and rather than develop those abilities, you gave up on them and took to the internet to complain about how it's all the black kids' faults. The loudness is a common trend among poor students more so than black students. I've had black students whose parents were well off who were quiet as mice when surrounded by a poor majority. Many middle-class black students learn the behavior from their impoverished peers, some of whom might even be loud white kids. Students coming from poverty are raised within environments of lower-class norms and values. Public schools operate in a system of middle-class norms and values. The lower-class norms consist of things such as high-volume, good-natured, interrupting conversation with lots of laughing and people-based entertainment. Most poor kids aren't taught to sit quietly and enjoy a 2-hour feature film in IMAX, then sit patiently as the family dines at Olive Garden. They often value the ability to entertain one another and to find amusement in trivial things. It improves their quality of life and that of those around them. The bursting out of information and opinion is not some curse of a student's blackness. It's a symptom of a child who doesn't have an audience elsewhere, who doesn't have adults or family members eagerly listening to them and engaging them in discussion. So they've learned that if they want their voice heard, they need to shout above the crowd. As a public school teacher, it's your job to teach people from all socioeconomic backgrounds and ethnicities, and to teach them that all the middle class norms and values that your classroom operates under are necessary, and constantly reinforce those standards. It's called classroom management. It's also your job to create a learning environment and time for class discussion where students know they will get a chance to be heard if they follow proper procedures. That takes a lot of hard work on your part, but if someone told you teaching was easy, that someone lied. Anyone who is around young blacks will probably get a constant diet of rap music. Blacks often make up their own jingles, and it was not uncommon for 15 black boys to swagger into a classroom, bouncing their shoulders and jiving back. They were yelling back and forth, rapping 15 different sets of words in the same harsh, rasping dialect. The words were almost invariably childish forms of boasting. Who get them shine rim? Who get them shine shoe? Who get them shine grill? Gold and silver dental caps? The amateur rapper usually ends with a claim in the crudest term imaginable that all womankind is sexually devoted to him. For whatever reason, my students would often groan instead of saying a particular word, as in, she sucked that ah, thinking of a long grinding groan. She fucked that ah, she licked that ah. Hip-hop is valued in black culture as it arose from that culture. As generations pass, it has changed and has influenced young people accordingly. I could explain the foundation of rap to you and its influence on black youths who listen to it, but the issue here is that you're blaming an entire group of people for listening to and replicating an integral piece of their recent culture. Now, if you want to critique rap culture for its deleterious influence on kids, that's a completely different subject. And no, black kids are not the only ones who like rap, nor is it fair to assume that anyone who works with black kids will be assaulted with it. I coached and taught many black youth who listened to a variety of music from heavy metal to country. Such exceptions to your observed stereotype are a regular minority, not a rare phenomenon. Black women love to dance in a way white people might call gyrating. So many black girls dance in the hall, in the classroom, on the chairs, next to the chairs, under the chairs, everywhere. Once I took a call on my cell phone and had to step outside of class. I was away about 2 minutes, but when I got back, the black girls had lined up at the front of the classroom and were convulsing to the delight of the boys. Not all black women love to dance, especially in that particular manner that you've described. Well, dancing, like rapping, is a valued skill in the black culture. It is not some innate nor exclusive love of black women. As a teacher, especially one who believes your students are as horrible as you seem to think, you should never leave your classroom unattended for any period of time, let alone for 2 minutes, especially because you got a cell phone call. I'm just hoping that 2-minute call was some non-education related HR office offering you a different job. Many black people, especially black women, are enormously fat. Some are so fat I had to arrange special seating to accommodate their bulk. I am not saying there are no fat white students. There are, but it is a matter of numbers and attitudes. Many black girls simply do not care that they are fat. There are plenty of white anorexics, but I have never heard of a black anorexic. Black women be big, Mr. Jackson, my students would explain. Is it okay in the black community to be a little overweight? I asked. 2 obese black girls in the front of my desk began to dance. You know them black boys like juicy fruit, Mr. Jackson. Juicy is a colorful black expression for the buttocks. First, you generalize black women as being enormously fat while acknowledging that white kids can be fat too. You seem to think that seeing more black kids that are fat in a school with a predominantly black population means that black kids, especially females, are fat. You're a dumbass. You then consider the observation that heavyset black women are less ashamed of their bodies than heavyset white women to be a negative thing. In a time and place where so many teenage girls are driven to depression and anorexia, which are not exclusive to white girls, by the way, over the insecurity of their body images, you're suggesting that a demographic of young women who seem less outwardly ashamed of their bodies is a bad thing? What I really find interesting is that you ignore the comparison of athleticism for black young men compared to that of white young men. I don't hear you complaining that more white boys should feel ashamed of their bodies because on average they're chubby compared to young black men. Or is that observation less comfortable for you to make? Blacks on average are the most directly critical people I have ever met. That shirt's stupid. Yo kid a bastard. Yo lips big. Unlike whites, who tread gingerly around the subject of race, they can be brutally to the point. Once I needed to send a student to the office to deliver a message. I asked for volunteers, and suddenly you would think my classroom was a bastion of civic engagement. 30 dark hands shot into the air. My students love to leave the classroom and slack off, even if just for a few minutes, away from the eye of white authority. I picked a light-skinned boy to deliver the message. One very black student was indignant. You picked a half-breed. And immediately, other blacks take up the cry, and half a dozen mouths were screaming, he half-breed. Students probably wanted to leave your classroom because they don't like it there. They want to be elsewhere. They want to do other things than be with you in that place. As far as being openly critical, humor-based insults are found commonly amongst the impoverished. It's financially free, simple entertainment. The reason that the white students around you tread carefully around race is probably because they're the minority. As I mentioned earlier, it's not fair to draw a comparison between a black majority and white minority in terms of behavior. Your white students may behave entirely differently if they were the majority. While it's true that many black students openly insult each other over things like skin complexion, many white children insult each other over plenty of bodily observations as well. Bullying, both sincere and lighthearted, happens in all ethnic groups from within all points of the socioeconomic spectrum. For decades, the country has been lamenting the poor academic performances of blacks, and there is much to lament. There is no question, however, that many blacks come to school with a serious handicap that is not their fault. At home, they have learned a dialect that is almost a different language. Blacks not only mispronounce words, their grammar is often wrong. When a black wants to ask, "Where is the bathroom?" he may actually say, "Where the bathroom be?" Grammatically, this is the equivalent to "where the bathroom is." And this is the way they speak in high school. Students write the way they speak, so this is the language that shows up in written exams. It is true that some whites face similar handicap. They speak with what I would call a country accent that is hard to reproduce but results in sentences such as, "I'm gonna gimme a Coke." Some of these country whites had to learn correct pronunciation and usage. The difference is that most whites overcome this handicap and learn to speak correctly. Many blacks do not. You're identifying a real problem that needs to be seriously addressed. Language is personal, and most poor black children don't have, in or out of home, adults who model standard English for them. Many learn English by listening to the non-standard slang of their parents and peers, reinforced by the famous rappers and athletes their culture appreciates. When that language, built and understood by everyone they love, is criticized, they take it personally. To correct that, they need to be gradually taught code switching and to have adults they respect in their lives modeling it correctly. Be that person. You can't fix a lifetime of bad modeling with one semester, but you can sure as hell make an impact if you do some things to deserve their respect. Most of the blacks I taught simply had no interest in academic subjects. I taught history, and students would often say they didn't want to do an assignment or they didn't like history because it was all about white people. Of course, this was diversity history, in which every cowboy's black cook got a special page on how he contributed to winning the West, but black children still found it inadequate. So I would throw up my hands and assign them a project on a real historical black person. My favorite was Marcus Garvey. They had never heard of him, and I would tell them to research him, but they never did. They didn't care, and they didn't want to do any work. Anyone who teaches blacks soon learns that they have a completely different view of government from whites. Once I decided to fill 25 minutes by having students write about one thing the government should do to improve America. I gave this question to 3 classes totaling about 100 students, approximately 80 of whom were black. My few white students came back with generally conservative ideas. We need to cut off people who don't work, was the most common suggestion. Nearly every black gave a variation of the theme of we need more government services. Oh wow, your 21st century black students weren't fascinated by history class. What a shocker. Guess what? Most students aren't fascinated by history class, or math class, or science class. Any given core subject in the U.S. state's curricula are not interesting to the majority of public school students. It's pretty hard for the War of 1812 to compete with Temple Run, Candy Crush, MP3s, and the entire fucking internet at their fingertips. As a teacher, it's your job to make that subject as interesting as possible for as many as you possibly can. To do that requires you to get to know all of your students as individuals, to understand their passions, curiosities, and learning styles. You don't do that by slapping one label onto them due to their skin color and considering them unreachable. And doing anything just to fill 25 minutes of class time is a clear sign of horrible teaching. Why you bring up the fact that more of your white students seem to have conservative ideals and more of your black students seem to have liberal ideals or democratic ideals, I'm not sure. I don't see why criticizing the underdeveloped political positions of your students is meaningful for the purpose of your essay. My students had only the vaguest notion of who pays for government services. For them, it was like a magical piggy bank that never goes empty. One black girl was exhorting the class on the need for more social services, and I kept trying to explain that people, real live people, are taxed for the money to pay for those services. Yeah, it come from whites, she finally said. They stingy anyway. Many black people make over $50,000 a year, and you would also be taking from your own people, I said. She had an answer to that. They half-breed. The class agreed. I let the subject drop. And therein lies the problem. You, their history teacher, let the subject drop when they displayed supreme ignorance on the matter. You threw up your hands instead of embracing what most undergrad education majors or even casual observers of the teaching profession would easily identify as a teachable moment. How can they be expected to learn the basics of history and government when you give up the moment you see that they don't already know what you're supposed to teach them? Granted, I understand it's difficult to cover the rigors of the high school curriculum to students lacking so much background information. But that means that we need more quality teachers in place, not people who are willing to make excuses and refuse to bother because it's hard. Many black girls are perfectly happy to be welfare queens. On career day, one girl explained to the class that she was going to have lots of children and get fat checks from the government. No one in the class seemed to have any objection to this career choice, because her culture supports that concept. It's your job to give her options, to explain the social and economic consequences that decisions like that have. You can make a class discussion about that relevant to your subject and be the impact that student needs. Even if on the surface she or the whole class may shrug it off, it's your job to cultivate seeds of new ways of thinking and processing information, and you didn't even bother to plant the seeds. Surprising attitudes can come out of class discussion. We were talking about the crimes committed in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and I brought up the rape of a young girl in a bathroom of the Superdome. A majority of my students believed this was a horrible crime, but a few took it lightly. One black boy spoke up without raising his hand. "Dat no big deal. They thought they is gonna die, so they figure they have some fun. They just want to have a fun time, you know what I'm saying?" A few black heads nodded in agreement. My department head once asked all teachers to give a response from all students on the following question. Do you think it is okay to break the law if it will benefit you greatly? By then, I had been teaching for a while and was not surprised by answers that left a young liberal white woman colleague aghast. "Yeah," was the favorite answer. As one student explained, "Get that green." In these brief class surveys given in a public forum on sensitive, controversial, or philosophical matters, you can expect to receive less than sincere, mature, thoughtful responses, especially if you haven't created a class environment where students feel secure in putting out their honest opinions on tough questions. That kind of atmosphere, again, takes a lot of work to create, and even if you do all that you can do, there's no guarantee that all your students will feel comfortable. So, if you're going to ask questions like that in a public venue, it's okay. But rather than shake your head in disgust at their initial responses, you should lead them into class discussion that breaks down the why behind the what. You've listed off problems that you see with these students' worldviews based on the misplaced values of the culture from which they've emerged. But rather than giving them tools to overcome that, you've said, oh well, it's too hard. They just are that way because they're black. That reaction is entirely your fault. There is a level of conformity among blacks that whites would find hard to believe. They like one kind of music, rap. They will vote for one political party, Democrat. They dance one way, speak one way, are loud the same way, and fail their exams the same way. Of course, there are exceptions, but they are rare. Whites are different. Some like country music, others heavy metal, some prefer pop, and still others, God forbid, enjoy rap music. They have different associations, groups, most ideologies. There are jocks, nerds, preppies, and hunters. Blacks are all, well, black, and they are quick to let other blacks know when they deviate from the norm. One might object that there are important group differences among blacks that a white man simply cannot detect. I have done my best to find them, but so far as I can tell, they dress the same, talk the same, think the same. Certainly, they form rival groups, but the groups are not different in any discernible way. There simply are no groups of blacks that are distinctly different from each other as white, nerds, hunters, or goths, for example. You're really starting to piss me off at this point. As mentioned earlier, plenty of black kids like country, pop, and metal music. Those genres aren't as socially accepted in black culture, so more of the black students who prefer them tend to keep it to themselves. But certainly not all do. Black culture does tend to try to have more unity amongst itself and try to criticize the outcasts a little more than in white culture because blacks in America are a minority surrounded by an overwhelming majority, so that unity is more valued. Also, amongst those who listen to rap, there are subgenres within rap music. Not all hip-hop is the same. It sounds like you're allowing the most obnoxious examples to stand out. Among my poor rural black students, plenty like rap, but R&B, jazz, and gospel were also popular musical tastes. Some like gangster rap, others prefer raw freestyle. Try asking those students who you appear to think are all just a bunch of thugs if any of them go to church, and ask if they sing Lil Wayne verses while they're there. And yes, there are diverse groups amongst black people, even those who don't make it as obvious for you to see as white kids apparently do. A kid doesn't have to dress out in a manner that fits one of your stereotypes to be a unique individual. All he or she needs to do is be human. From what I can tell, your inability to see those differences is not because a white man simply can't detect them, but more so because you're a jackass who can't see past the first layer of a student's personality. How the world looks to blacks. One point on which all blacks agree is everything is racist. This is one message of liberalism that they have absorbed completely. Did you do your homework? Nah, homework racist. Why did you get an F on the test? Test racist. I was trying to teach a unit on British philosophers, and the first thing students noticed about Bentham, Hobbes, and Locke was they all white. Where the black philosopher at? I tried to explain there were no blacks in 18th century Britain. You can probably guess what they said to that. That racist. One student accused me of deliberately failing him on a test because I didn't like black people. Do you think I really hate black people? Yeah. Have I done anything to make you feel this way? How do you know? You just do. Why do you say that? He just smirked, looked out the window, and sucked air through his teeth. Perhaps this was a regional thing, but the blacks often sucked air through their teeth as a wordless expression of disdain or hostility. You seriously just summarized the worldview of all black people into a single negative sentence and backed up your point with purely anecdotal evidence of one circumstance while simultaneously complaining that those students consider you and the general attitude of the country around them as being racist. That doesn't strike you as slightly hypocritical or illogical? You fancy yourself to be an academic and you can't see the flaws with that? Now, granted, there are many things that hold back modern black culture, which popular black Americans like Bill Cosby and Morgan Freeman have spoken openly about. One of those things is the shifting of blame and accountability of their problems elsewhere by consistently playing the race card. It's not, however, something that all blacks agree on, nor does you being blatantly racist help to solve that. You're dealing with the minority group that you later in this essay describe as people you're afraid of when they walk past you, and you're really shocked that many of them are paranoid about racism? My students were sometimes unable to see the world except through the lens of their own blackness. I had a class that was host to a German exchange student. One day he put on a PowerPoint presentation with famous German landmarks, as well as his school and family. From time to time during the presentations, blacks would scream, "Where the black folk at?" The exasperated German tried several times to explain that there were no black people where he lived in Germany. The students did not believe him. I told them Germany is in Europe, where white people are from, and Africa is where black people are from. They insisted that German student was racist and deliberately refused to associate with blacks. Are you able to see the world except through the lens of your own whiteness? You again failed to capitalize on a teachable moment. In fact, you oversimplified what could have been a meaningful discussion and made the world out to be a more segregated place than it really is. And you regard this failure on your part to be the inevitable short-sightedness of a group of students who are sent to you to learn just because they were ignorant upon their arrival. I had a foreign exchange student from Denmark to whom students reacted similarly. By the end of the semester, however, they learned a lot more about Denmark and thereby had a better understanding of the world outside of what they're immediately exposed to. Many poor kids don't get to leave their own towns very often, so it's an educator's job to broaden their horizons, which you failed miserably at in this example. Blacks are keenly interested in their own racial characteristics. I have learned, for example, that some blacks have good hair. Good hair is black parlance for black-white hybrid hair. Apparently, it is less kinky, easier to style, and considered more attractive. Blacks are also proud of light skin. Imagine two black students shouting insults across the room. One is dark but slim, the other light and obese. The dark one begins to exchange. "You fat, Rodario." Rodario smiles, doesn't deign to look at his detractor, shakes his head like a wobbling top and says, "You wish you light-skinned." They could go on like this, repeating the same insults over and over. Oh, of course, white girls never talk about some of them having good hair and some of them not. Straight hair girls never envy natural curls and vice versa. White kids never pick on one another for being pasty and pale and not having a good tan or being ugly in general. Yeah, that never happens among social circles of white kids. My black students had nothing but contempt for Hispanic immigrants. They would vent their feelings so crudely that our department strongly advised us never talk about immigration in class in case the principal or some outsider might overhear. Whites were racists, of course, but they thought of us at least as Americans. Not the Mexicans. Blacks have a certain, not necessarily hostile understanding of white people. They know how whites act, and it is clear they believe whites are smart and good at organizing things. At the same time, they probably suspect whites are just putting on an act while they talk about equality, as if it's all a sham that makes it easier for whites to control blacks. Blacks want a bigger piece of the American pie. I'm convinced that if it were up to them, they would give the whites a considerably smaller piece than the whites get now, but they would give us something. They wouldn't give Mexicans anything. Fucking teachable moment! What about black boys and white girls? No one is supposed to notice this or talk about it, but it is glaringly obvious. Black boys are obsessed with white girls. I've witnessed the following drama countless times. A black boy saunters up to a white girl. The cocky black dances around her, not really in a menacing way. It's more of a shuffle than a threat. As he bobs and shuffles, he asks, "When you gonna go with me?" There are two kinds of reply. The more confident white girl gets annoyed, looks away from the black, and shouts, "I don't want to go out with you." The more demure girl will look at her feet and mumble a polite excuse, but ultimately say no. There is only one response from the black boy: "You racist." Many girls, all too many, actually feel guilty because they do not want to date blacks. Most white girls at my school stayed away from blacks, but a few, particularly the ones who were addicted to drugs, fell in with them. According to you, there are only two kinds of replies from a white girl being offered the courtship of a black boy, and both are rejections. White girls never agree to date black boys, and the black boys always approach them in a crass and crude manner, huh? That's demonstrably false because interracial relationships exist with white boys and black girls, and with white girls and black boys. And for you to label those few white girls who do date black boys as mostly drug addicts who had the misfortune of falling in with them makes you opposed to interracial relationships. I did some brief research and found that you can buy a used DeLorean for around $45,000. I'd say you should put forth that investment fired up to 88 miles per hour, preferably heading straight towards the nearest building, and cross your fingers in hopes that you'll arrive back in the 1950s when your way of thinking was still modern. There is something else that is striking about blacks. They seem to have no sense of romance, of falling in love. What brings men and women together is sex, pure and simple, and there is crude openness about this. There are many degenerate whites, of course, but some of my white students were capable of real devotion and tenderness, emotions that seemed absent from blacks, especially the boys. Oh wow, I've never seen any white males who were primarily interested in sexually based relationships. Yeah, those white kids must be the fleeting minority. Most white boys at the age of 16 just want to hold hands and grow old with the girls they like. Why don't you go out of your way a little bit and talk to a married, black, or interracial couple and ask them why they love each other? Maybe you'll learn something. Black schools are violent, and the few whites who are too poor to escape are caught in the storm. The violence is astonishing, not so much that it happens, but the atmosphere in which it happens. Blacks can be smiling, seeming perfectly content with what they are doing, having a good time, and then suddenly start fighting. It's uncanny. Not long ago, I was walking through the halls, and a group of black boys were walking in front of me. All of a sudden, they started fighting with another group in the hallway. Perhaps your black school was violent. That doesn't mean all schools with a majority black population are. And how do you classify a school as violent? How many schools have you taught in to draw this comparison? Teenage boys are surging with testosterone, forging their identities, and are asked to sit still and be quiet all day. Don't be surprised when they get a little scrappy from time to time, no matter what color their skin is. Blacks are extraordinarily quick to take offense. Once I accidentally scuffed a black boy's white sneaker with my shoe. He immediately rubbed his body against mine and threatened to attack me. I stepped outside the class and had a security guard escort the student to the office. It was unusual for students to threaten teachers physically this way, but among themselves they were quick to fight for similar reason. Almost anyone's quick to take offense if you push the wrong buttons. Scuffing those shoes may not mean much to you, but they could mean everything to that kid. They could mean a quarter of his mother's monthly income to him. You may argue that poor families shouldn't spend money on luxury items, and you're right, they shouldn't. But they often do so because those expensive shoes are a status symbol that gets a kid respect for not looking poor. The short-sighted nature of those suffering from poverty keeps them focused on what's right in front of them. Their natural focus is on the present. Where's the next meal coming from? What's happening now? What's entertaining me now? Etc. This is environmentally conditioned, and it takes time and patience and effort to get a mind focused on the present to develop foresight to do things like saving money. In the meantime, it's a teacher's job to understand that students are products of their environment and should be helped with that, but not blamed, insulted, or misunderstood for it. The real victims are the unfortunate whites caught in this. They are always in danger and their educations suffer. White weaklings are particularly susceptible, but mostly to petty violence. They may be slapped or get a couple of kicks when they are trying to open a bottom locker. Typically, blacks save the hard, serious violence for each other. So the hard, serious violence is reserved for black kids, but the real victims are the white kids who receive petty violence? Go fuck yourself. There was a lot of promiscuous sex among my students, and this led to violence. Black girls were constantly fighting over black boys. It was not uncommon to see two girls literally ripping each other's hair out with a police officer in the middle trying to break up the fight. The black boy they were fighting over would be standing by with a smile, enjoying the show he had created. For reasons I cannot explain, boys seldom fought over girls. Pregnancy was common among the blacks, although many black girls were so fat I could not tell the difference. I don't know how many girls got abortions, but when they had the baby, they usually stayed in school and had their own parents look after the child. The school did not offer daycare. You've just described a typical inner city or rural high school wherein resides a majority of students who live below the poverty line. The only difference is the sprinkling of racism and fat shaming into yours. Congratulations. Aside from the police officers constantly on patrol, a sure sign that you are in a black school is the coke cage, the chain link fence that many majority black schools use to protect vending machines. The cage surrounds the machine and even covers its top. Delivery employees have to unlock a gate on the front of the cage to service the machines. Companies would prefer not to build cages around vending machines. They are expensive, ugly, and a bother. But black students smashed the machines so many times it was cheaper to build a cage than repair the damage. Rumor had it that before the cages went up, blacks would turn the machines upside down in the hope that money would fall out. Security guards are everywhere in black schools. We had one on every hall. They also sat in unruly classes and escorted students to the office. They were unarmed, but worked closely with 3 city police officers who were constantly on duty. Your school had disciplinary issues. Has it ever occurred to you that it's possible there are majority black schools in the country that don't need cages around the vending machines or security guards in each hallway? Is it really wise to assume that your limited experience means that you're sure to be in a black school if you see things like that? Your short-sightedness here is mind-numbing. There was a lot of drug dealing at my school. This was a good way to make a fair amount of money, but it also gave boys power over girls who wanted drugs. An addicted girl, black or white, became the plaything of anyone who could get her drugs. One of my students was a notorious drug dealer. Everyone knew it. He was 19 years old and in 11th grade. Once he got a score of 3 out of 100 on a test. He had been locked up 4 times since he was 13. One day I asked him, "Why do you come to school?" He wouldn't answer. He just looked out the window, smiled, and sucked air through his teeth. His friend Yadarius ventured an explanation. "He get that green and get them females." "What is green?" I asked. "Money or dope?" "Both," said Yadarius with a smile. A very fat black interrupted from the room. "We get that lunch, Mr. Jackson. We gotta get that lunch and breakfast." He means the free breakfast and lunch poor students get every day. "Nigga, we knowed you be lovin' breakfast," shouts another student. "I'm going to let you in on a little secret, Mr. Jackson. Most students aren't interested in ivory tower elements of school, or at the very least, not of all of their classes. Many students are only there because they have to be, and their primary interests may be one particular subject, or any number of other things like sports, clubs, socializing, food, financial opportunities, drugs, etc., especially among students from middle to lower class families. There are a lot of things about schools that are more interesting than learning historical minutiae for a state standardized test or how to solve trig equations. You know what else? Oftentimes those extra things that keep kids willingly coming to school are keeping them there long enough for them to actually learn things if they have quality, compassionate teachers. Even if they didn't have parents who took the time and had the wherewithal to instill within them the intrinsic value of education. Hell, I didn't have that intrinsic value for it until 10th grade, thanks to a great teacher. The kind of teacher you've chosen not to be. Some readers may believe that I have drawn a cruel caricature of black students. After all, according to the official figures, some 85% of them graduate. It would be instructive to know how many of those scrape by with barely a C- record. They go from grade to grade and finally get their diplomas because there is so much pressure on teachers to push them through. It saves money to move them along, and the school looks good and the teachers look good. Many of these children should have been failed, but the system would crack under their weight if they are all held back. You've strawmen those who stand in opposition of your blatant racism and short-sightedness by assuming that misleading graduation rates are the best refutation to your crass overgeneralizations. Passing along students who technically aren't proficient in subject matters does happen to be one of the several flawed necessities in our broken education system that cries for repairs, but that's something worth writing an essay on and doing something about. There are plenty of academically apathetic, low-performing white kids who get passed along to their diplomas, but I couldn't cite that as an honest defense for making a caricature of all white kids in a massive essay about how awful white students are based on my experience at one predominantly white school. How did my experiences make me feel about blacks? Ultimately, I lost sympathy for them. In so many ways, they seemed to make their own beds. There they were in integrationist fantasy, in the same classroom with white students, eating the same lunch, using the same bathrooms, listening to the same teachers, and yet the blacks fail while the whites pass. One tragic outcome among whites who have been teaching for too long is it can engender something close to hatred. One teacher I knew gave up fast food, not for health reasons, but because where he lived most fast food workers were black. He had enough of blacks on the job. This was an extreme example, but years of frustration can take their toll. Many of my white colleagues with any experience were well on their way to that state of mind. You've described a common tragedy among all teachers who have taught too long in a school that lacks parental involvement and meaningful administrative discipline. I've spent the last 4 years in a poor rural school with a majority black student, staff, and school board population. The teachers with poor classroom management who lack the tenacity or drive to work their way into becoming better at it usually do spiral into the state of frustration you've described. They point their fingers at how the horrible behavior in their classroom is everyone else's fault and that students should just automatically respect them and be well-behaved, enthusiastic learners. If they aren't like that, it must be all because of their parents or because they're poor or they're black or it's any number of other excuses they can think of. But at some point, the finger needs to come back to you as the teacher. You have to accept the impossibility of your job, embrace the challenge, and do the best you can. If you don't have that in you, teaching's not for you, especially in an environment which obviously lacks structural discipline and academic success. If you have enough committed teachers, you can turn that school around. If you have enough bad teachers who give up on them and make excuses for them, you reinforce everything they already believe about authority, education, and adults, that nobody cares about them, usually for some reason beyond their control. There is an unutterable secret among teachers. Almost all realize that blacks do not respond to traditional white instruction. Does that put the lie to the environmentalism? Not at all. It is what brings about endless, pointless innovation that is supposed to bring blacks up to the white level. The solution is more diversity. Or put more generally, the solution is change. Change is an almost holy word in education, and you can fail 1,000,000 times as long as you keep changing. That is why liberals keep revamping the curriculum and the way it is taught. For example, teachers are told that blacks need hands-on instruction and more group work. Teachers are told that blacks are more vocal and do not learn through reading and lectures. The implication is that they have certain traits that lend themselves to a different kind of teaching. Whites have learned a certain way for centuries, but it just doesn't work with blacks. Of course, this implies racial differences, but if pressed, most liberal teachers would say different racial learning styles come with some indefinable cultural characteristic unique to blacks. Therefore, schools must change, America must change, but into what? How do you turn quantum physics into hands-on instruction or group work? No one knows, but we must keep changing until we find something that works. Maybe that secret is unutterable because it's a strand of racist bullshit. The majority of students today don't respond to what you call traditional white instruction. All students have their own learning styles. Those styles are determined by the makeup of their brains, not the pigment of their skins. Look into multiple intelligences and differentiated instruction. You know, the things that most teachers learn about by their second or third year of college. The days of students sitting quietly and reading from textbooks, then filling out worksheets are over. We don't live in that world anymore. Teachers have to compete with too much digital media, short attention spans, and the expanding social world. In an impoverished environment, the problem is typically compounded by the lack of modeling and very poor nutrition. Trying to educate students of any ethnicity today, as we did centuries ago, is hopeless and backwards. Change is essential. It's not because those darn black kids just can't learn in the traditional white way either. Wake the fuck up. Public school has certainly changed since anyone reading this was a student. I have a friend who teaches elementary school, and she tells me every week the students get a new diversity lesson, shipped in fresh from some bureaucrat's office in Washington, or the state capitol. She showed me the materials for one week, a large poster about the size of a 42-inch flat-screen television. It shows an utterly diverse group, I mean diverse, handicapped, Muslim, Jewish, effeminate, poor, rich, brown, slightly brown, yellow, etc., sitting at a table, smiling gaily, accomplishing some undefined task. The poster comes with a sheet of questions the teacher is supposed to ask. One might be, these kids sure look different, but they look happy. Can you tell me which one in the picture is an American? Some 8-year-old mired in ignorance will point to the white child like himself. That one. The teacher reads from the answer conveniently printed along with the question. No, Billy, all these children are Americans. They are all just as American as you. The children get a snack and the poster goes up on the wall until another one comes a week later. This is what happens at predominantly white middle-class elementary schools everywhere. Elementary school teachers love all the colors of the race by award-winning poet Arnold Adolph. These are some of the lines read to the children. Mama is chocolate, daddy is vanilla, me is better. It is a new color. It is a new flavor for some. Sometimes blackness seems too black for me, and whiteness is too sickly pale, and I wish everyone were golden. Remember, long ago, before people moved and migrated, mixed and matched, there was one people, one color, one race. The colors are flowing from what was before me to what will be after. All the colors. Though I don't necessarily support the concept that black is too black or white is too white in that book, I don't see the problem with teaching kids that anyone who lives in America deserves to be treated like an American rather than stereotyped for their skin colors, handicaps, or religions. I also don't see the harm in a central message that all people are humans and we should connect with them on that level before making ethnic-based judgments. You'll have to explain to me why that's such a bad thing. Teaching as a career. It may come as a surprise after what I've written, but my experiences have given me a deep appreciation for teaching as a career. It offers a stable middle-class lifestyle, comes with the capacity to make real differences in the lives of children. In our modern atomized world, children often have very little communication with adults, especially or even with their parents. So there is potential for real transaction between pupil and teacher, disciple and master. A rewarding relationship can grow up between an exceptional, interested student and his teacher. I have stayed in my classroom with a group of students discussing ideas and playing chess until the janitor kicked us out. I was the old gentleman imparting my history, culture, personal loves and triumphs, defeats and failures to young kinsmen. Sometimes I fancied myself Tardius, the Spartan poet who counseled the youth to honor and loyalty. I never had this kind of intimacy with a black student, and I know of no other white teacher who did. You express a big problem with your teaching philosophy. For you, the best teacher-student relationship is one of a disciple and master nature, wherein they come to you as an abundant well of knowledge from which they can quench their insatiable thirst. It's what most people in education know as big desk teaching. It's a naive idea that many young teachers have, that they'll come in and sit at their big desk in front of the room and lord over their class, dispensing knowledge in their own way that will magically stick to their students' minds. That's not how education really works. And if you teach that way, the only students that you're going to get through to are the ones whose natural passions or interests are in your content area anyway, and that already fit the one teaching style you'll use. Based on what you've said here, though, it doesn't shock me that diversification isn't your forte. Also, when you have the mindset that you're the master and that they're all just your little disciples and minions, then you tend to cheat yourself out of learning all that they have to offer you. It explains why you struggle so much with making connections. Teaching can be fun. For a certain kind of person, it's exhilarating to map out battles on chalkboards and teach heroism. It's rewarding to challenge liberal prejudices, to leave my mark on these children. But what I aimed for with my white students, I could never achieve with the blacks. There is a kind of child whose look can melt your heart, some working class castaway in and out of foster homes, often abused, who is nevertheless almost an angel. Your heart melts for these children, this refuse of modern world. If what you aimed for with the white students you couldn't achieve with the black students, then you failed, not them. Many white students possess a certain innocence. Their cheeks still blush. Try as I might, I could not get the blacks to care one bit about Beethoven or Sherman's March to the Sea or Tardius or Oswald Spengler or even liberals like John Rawls or their own history. They cared about nothing I tried to teach them. When this goes on year after year, it chokes the soul out of a teacher, destroys his pathos, and sends him guiltily searching for the bell curve on the internet. Blacks break down the intimacy that can be achieved in the classroom and leave you convinced that this intimacy is really a form of kinship without intending to. They destroy what is most beautiful, whether it be your belief in human equality, your daughter's innocence, or even the state of the hallway. You honestly believe that no teachers have meaningful connections with their black students because black kids just lack innocence or emotional connectivity? That is impossible for students to take interest in historical figures that they have trouble relating to just because you failed to cultivate that interest. A lot of students I've taught never took a strong interest in my content area. In fact, some of them loathed it as much as when they left my classroom as they did the first day they got there. But they knew more of it, and they valued my class because I took the time, effort, and energy to not tell but show them that I cared about their successes as individuals. A student-teacher relationship is important, especially for those not interested in your subject. Those relationships don't form when all you do is write a kid off for his or her skin color or body shape. Just last year, I read on the bathroom stall the words, "fuck whitey." Not 2 feet away on the same stall was a small swastika. You're seriously judging these kids based on the content of their restroom graffiti? It's a toilet stall. Go to the restroom stalls of the whitest, richest schools in America, and I doubt you're going to see the musings of Walt Whitman carved in the paint. The National Council for Social Studies, the leading authority on social science education in the United States, urges teachers to inculcate such values as equality of opportunity, individual property rights, and democratic form of government. Even if teachers could inculcate this milquetoast ideology into whites, liberalism is doomed because so many non-whites are not receptive to education of any kind beyond the merest basics. It is impossible to get them to care about such abstractions as property rights or democratic citizenship, and they do not see much further than the fact that you live in a big house and we live in the project. Of course, there are a few loudish whites who will never think past their next meal and a few sensitive blacks for whom anything is possible, but no society takes on the characteristics of its exceptions. And how is it possible that black men and women manage to take governmental offices in this country? How is it that we have black mayors, governors, senators, representatives, and black voting populations who support them? How is it that members of a minority group, the overwhelming majority of which you claim have no interest in education or a democratic process, climb their way through a white majority to positions of political power? Could it be that just maybe the students in your one classroom at your one school who had you as their teacher didn't seem too interested in those things? And if they didn't see past the fact that you lived in a nice place and they didn't, then, well, I've lost track of the number of teachable moments that you've openly admitted you failed to capitalize on just in this essay. Once I asked my students, "What do you think of the Constitution?" "It white," one slouching black rang out. The class began to laugh, and I caught myself laughing along with them, laughing while Pompeii's volcano simmers, while the barbarians swell around the Palatine, while the country I love and the job I love and the community I love become dimmer by the day. Sounds a lot like you didn't bother to go through the Constitution before asking their opinions about it. You just assume that these students you've described as highly uninterested in education and ignorant of government have all read and analyzed the Constitution comprehensively, and you're going to condescend to them based on their lack of understanding of it when they haven't satisfied that really fucking stupid expectation. Teach them! I read a book by an expatriate Rhodesian who visited Zimbabwe not too many years ago. Traveling with a companion, she stopped at a store along the highway. A black man materialized next to her car window. "Job, boss. Work good, boss," he pleaded. "You give job." "What happened to your old job?" the expatriate white asked. The black man replied in a straightforward manner of his race. "We drove out the whites. No more jobs. You give job." At some level, my students understand the same thing. One day I asked the bored black faces staring back at me, what would happen if all the white people in America disappeared tomorrow? "We screwed," a young pitch black boy screamed back. The rest of the blacks laughed. I have had children tell me to my face as they struggled with an assignment, "I can't do this, Mr. Jackson. I black." That helplessness and attitude of self-defeat that you're hearing is coming from kids who've been told by society and adults for their whole childhood that they're essentially second-class citizens, that if they can't shoot a basketball or sing and dance, then there's no hope for them to be successful. It's your job to expose them to the opportunities they have, to empathize with their position as best you can, and to do everything you can to show them the options that are available and to decimate that sense of self-pity and self-defeat that binds their potential. And if you just shake your head at them and consider them pathetic, then you're another of many parts of the problem instead of being the solution that you have a chance to be. These are the worst teachable moments for you to turn your back on, and it churns my stomach to think that you did. The point is that human beings are not always rational. It is the black man's interest to have whites in Zimbabwe, but he drives them out and starves. Most whites do not think black Americans could do anything so irrational. They see blacks on television, smiling, fighting evil whites, embodying white values. But the real black is not on television, and you pull your purse closer when you see him. You lock your car doors when he swaggers by with his pants hanging down almost to his knees. If anything, you've proven here that humans aren't always rational, so I'm not going to condemn that. Though I must point out that your obnoxious projection of how you assume all people must view black people is disturbing and disgusting. You don't have to sag your pants in order to be a real black person. Not all of them do that. And not all non-minorities lock their car doors or clutch their purses when a black man walks by. These are things that you do because you failed to allow your time in a culture that you don't understand to teach you anything, which frankly makes me pity you. For those of you with children, better a smaller house in a white district than a fancy one near a black school. I have been in parent-teacher conferences that broke my heart. The child pleading with his parents to take him out of the school. The parents convinced that their child's fears are groundless. If you love your child, show her you care, not by giving her fancy vacations or a car, but making her innocent years safe and happy. Give her the gift of a not heavily black school. I will reply to parents with some more productive advice. Send your kids to a school where you feel they will receive a quality education and be exposed to meaningful social experiences. Don't shelter them from reality or diversity, no matter what color they are. And when they come home with tough questions, be there for them and answer them the best you can. Perhaps most importantly, be a presence in their schools. Talk to the teachers who don't make it a point to get in touch with you, and ask them about their educational philosophies and their concerns with your children. If they have anything to say, like the bullshit this particular teacher did, make sure the administration, and if need be the school board, hears about it.